Fine. So, all right. Low traffic neighbourhoods. That's flavour of the week, isn't it? So I'm Patrick Lingwood. I'm the active travel lead at Oxfordshire County Council. And there's my email, but I am using up the end of the leave for the year, so I'm not back until April, in fact. So to go on, my presentation layout. So first I'll give an update on what is happening now on the Cowley LTN. And then I'll say how we did it, actually how we got to this point, which is actually kind of very fortuitous, you could say. And then why we did it, the 5 main policy reasons. And then kind of look at basically who supports LTNs and who doesn't from the data we collected on the Cowley LTN. So to go on. So here are the first of the 3 LTNs, Church Cowley, which, well, is in the process of going in, and maybe is almost finished because there have been some issues in terms of some elements. So there are 5 filters, 1 bus filter, and it's kind of, well, we'll see. In particular, it's on a particular important cycle route, but I'll come back to explain that in a minute. Here's the other one, Florence Park, with 3 filters and a bus filter, the brown one. At this point, I will say one of the, let's say, hiccups, one of the problems, teething issues, is the fact that we hope to have the bus cameras in at the same time. Because of various reasons out of our control, there will be a delay before they go in. And finally, here is Temple Cowley, 4 filters, which are actually happening at this very moment. And the last one, well, I think the last 2 are not quite in yet. So there have been a few teething problems, and I will, and some of the teething problems have been hit the headlines, but they are actually just teething problems. We are the first, this is the first time we have implemented low traffic neighbourhoods, and in spite of lots of preparation and lots of consultation and lots of other measures we've looked at, we have made a few, let's say, there's been a few teething problems. Signage is one. Sometimes the signage wasn't as clear as possible. Sometimes it wasn't quite in the right place. But actually, in fact, what I've learned is that drivers don't believe the signage, even when there's a big sign saying no through road, or they have to actually see the filter before they actually believe the sign. There has been a slight issue. In fact, I think this is a very relevant one, in the fact that there were 2 teams to install the filters. In fact, actually 3 teams, in fact, counting the so completely different contractors. So the contractors who are putting in the planters are different from the contractors putting in the bollards, who will be different from the contractors painting in the yellow lines. They all have the same plans, but they don't come at the same time. As a result, there's been a certain toing and froing of putting cones out and people taking them away again. But in the end, they will all have proper bollards, proper planters, and proper double yellow lining. So this situation of a car driver having to do the 3-point turn, I say, has been very common in the last few weeks, last 2 weeks. As I say, that driver, for instance, there was a very clear sign saying no through road, but I think the drivers have to actually see for themselves that it isn't a through road. But in the end, we're getting there. So this is the Beecham Lane filter with the planters and the bollard in. Here's the Little Moor Road with the planters and the bollard in, including the bollards on the footways to prevent cars going round the planters. And here's one in Little Road, which are just made of planters. And kind of what is amazing, really, is the impact it has had on these residential streets. And I would say it has been transformative. To take the net, so and here's the last one showing Beecham Lane with the filters and planters. But this is an image of Little Moor Road, Cowley Road. And if you're cycling, or if you live there, or if you're walking, would not normally a picture you could easily take. This road was very busy with continuous traffic and actually has transformed the environment. And I think if one's eyes are open, if one is willing to look at it, it has transformed it for the better. That point, going to the co-op, people used to say, wanted a crossing there, a zebra crossing or pelican crossing. There's no need anymore. This has let people really, it is a proper low traffic neighbourhood. And I urge people who haven't been to Waltham Forest, you don't need to anymore, because actually this area is like Waltham Forest. It is low traffic, it is quiet, and it is really changed. I mean, it's changed beyond my expectations. Here's the Rymers Lane beside Florence Park. Once again, you can hear bird song. It's just quiet. It's just lovely. I will say, go and visit it. Please do. But anyway, so that's the short what has happened. So how did we get here? How did we get to this point? In a way, we were fortunate. What happened was, first of all, following the visits to Waltham Forest, I realised really the impact that LTNs could have. And so preparing the Oxford LCRIP at that point, the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, it was decided to be a policy to be one of the 8 pillars of the how we meet our targets, our ambitious targets to have 50% more cycling in Oxford. And so there's this policy within the LCRIP, which was approved in 17 March 2020 by the Council, saying OCC will support the implementation of low traffic neighbourhoods in Oxford as a way of improving local public realm and improving conditions for walking and cycling. I usually add, when people say, well, we want a low traffic neighbourhood in this area, where there is local support and funding. And underneath, it gives the reasons why LTNs are very important. So LTNs are fundamental in promoting cycling and walking because they remove rat runs. F3 refers to one of the basic fundamental principles of promoting cycling, and thereby lead to less traffic and slower traffic speeds in residential areas, providing opportunity for people to cycle in safety and comfort to the nearest cycle routes, as well as opportunities for parkless and improved local public realm for pedestrians, residents and cyclists. In several cases, and that's one we saw before, the LTNs will potentially remove nearly all the traffic from some of the core radial quiet cycle routes. So after that was adopted or approved by the council, full council, COVID-19 happened, and subsequently the government sent out statutory guidance. Statutory guidance means the council has to do it as a part of the Traffic Management Act, saying that local authorities must or should take measures to reallocate road space to people walking and cycling. And the measures included modal filters, known as filtered mode permeability, which can create neighbourhoods that are low traffic or traffic free. So kind of the first early mentions of low traffic neighbourhoods. And subsequently, Gear Change came out with a policy document saying, in order to promote cycling, a quicker way to providing safe, low traffic cycling is to close roads through traffic by point closures. And it said there will be less rat running and many, many more low traffic neighbourhoods. And also they gave the potential of investment. We will choose up to 12 willing local authority areas to benefit from intensive investment in mini Holland schemes, which is another way of saying low traffic neighbourhoods. So I seem to have missed it. So I think, yeah, sorry. So basically, going back to here, we put in a bid for tranche 2, which included low traffic neighbourhoods, and we were one of the 7 local authorities in the whole of England that actually got more funding than we were allocated. We got a much improved bid, 125% of our allocated funding, which included the schemes. So why are we doing this? And as I've answered quite a few queries, and some people might say, why on earth are we doing this? There are 5, I think, main benefits from low traffic neighbourhoods. First of all, for residents, there's urban livability. Secondly, important as part of the bid, is to promote active travel, particularly cycling, but also walking. Thirdly, is to promote children's independent travel, which has become quite an important traffic issue because the school run has become a major source of congestion, and also in terms of, let's say, people's complaining about their local streets being used as a car park. Then also to reduce air pollution, and finally decongestion, which means kind of trying to remove traffic jams in Oxford. So in terms of urban livability, we asked the residents of Cowley in their survey what their priorities were for their local area or the local street. And this is the responses. We got 967 responses from the Cowley area. In terms of their priorities, it's kind of adding all, giving 3 points to very important and 0 to not important. So this is what it adds up to. And so looking at the 6 top priorities are reduce traffic speeds, reduce air pollution, make it easier and safer to cycle, make it safer for children to travel and play, remove or reduce through traffic, and make it easier to cross roads on foot. Those are absolutely core, fundamental objectives of a low traffic neighbourhood. The ones below, some will be facilitated. So if we have more funding to enhance the area, more trees and planting, to reduce traffic congestion on nearby main roads, that's a different issue, which we can argue about. Create pleasant areas where you can meet up, make bus services quicker and more reliable, are all likely to benefit. And then the one which is counter to low traffic neighbourhoods is the priority of keep your local roads open so car trips are easy and convenient. So in a sense, seeing that they're all some priorities, the local residents obviously realise that in terms of priority was the least important for them. Promoting cycling and walking. Just a piece of national data. I think it's a shocking figure that actually in a national survey, in a national travel attitude survey, that 66% of adults agreed that it's too dangerous for me to cycle on the roads. This is really, we really have come to a very bad case, really. And if you look at it, the kind of this is broken down. That's 70% of women and 60% of men, non-cyclists in particular 70%, and older people. So it is, in a sense, to counter that fact that many people perceive just cycling on roads as dangerous wherever, that the low traffic neighbourhoods are very useful. And it is part of the local LC-WIP is identified a comprehensive cycle network for Oxford. And in particular, what those low traffic neighbourhoods have as a fundamental objective is to improve what is route, actually unfortunately changed the name, route 1516, which is a route which goes from Greater Lees at the bottom of this plan, through Littlemore, and then through Church Cowley, through Florence Park, through East Oxford, St Mary's, and then links into Cowley Road or Iffley Road to get into the city centre. Now that route is the primary objective of the LTNs as far as the Tranche 2 bid was concerned. And I think we have made a big step towards actually improving that route for everyone. And it links into schools, and it links into shopping centres, and it is a way that cyclists can get into the centre virtually traffic-free, virtually. And when I've had discussions with people saying, well, why do we need this? Why can't we drive? I've said, well, you've got Iffley Road, you've got Cowley Oxford Road. We know they will have to always be open for cars and open for other traffic because that's part of they're the main roads. But this road is actually a residential road. As well as Route 1516, it also improves these other local routes, Route 8, which goes from Temple Cowley, going that way, Route 9, which goes through Florence Park and leads up here and actually heads towards Headington, and Route 11, which is a route that Rose Hill can link across to Cowley. In terms of the improvements, we have the data from the Oxfordshire Cycle Survey, which asked the views of about 3,500 cyclists, or got the views of 3,500 cyclists. And from that, we developed something called the Oxford Cycle Route Assessment Matrix. And at the moment, taking Route 15 and 16, it is a fairly busy road. It is so for quiet cyclists and quick cyclists, because we found there was two cohorts. Both of them, it is in the negative. Once it becomes like a quiet residential road, it shoots up into being at the top, the most preferential kind of route, basically. So I really believe it will have a fundamental change and actually help us go towards the targets of 50% increased cycling, and really open up those routes to people who've not been able to cycle before because it's been too scary. Going on to children's freedom, this is from national data, and we have a comparison between, this is the percentage of parents reporting they allow their child to travel home alone from school, the by area. So whereas there's not been much change in the last secondary school children, look back at 1971, 85% of children could have come back from school, as far as parents concerned, with no worry. And that has fallen first with 30% and now down to 25%. The net impact is there are lots of parents in their cars waiting to pick up children at schools. This is another, and I see over here we can see Oxfordshire is in the same, it's the same data as the rest of England, so it's not particularly different. So it is part of the hope for the LTNs is that actually it will let children have more freedom to go on their cycle or walking, and thereby encourage a kind of what used to be almost, no question that children could explore their environment by themselves or together. Air quality, very quickly. This is from the Air Quality Action Plan. Transport accounts for 68% as a source for NOx emissions in Oxford, mostly from car. So reducing the cars will at least improve the local air quality of these areas. Decongestion. This is one of the major concerns, which kind of links together. First of all, people think because their routes will be longer, individual car routes will be longer, and that therefore it will increase congestion. It's a kind of a fairly easy conclusion to come to. So these are the percentage of people who objected in the survey and what their objections were. So therefore increased pollution, increased journey time. So it is an easy way of concluding, but in fact, there are two pieces of very classic research. One way back in 1964, and what in 1964 Colin Buchanan proved as much as you can prove anything in transport, that there was no way any town of any size at all can build their way that everyone can choose to go by car. It is just not possible. And it was kind of very, very controversial stuff, but his last statement there, to invest, or you can invest less in works and curtail the usage of vehicles. And on the other side, there's a more, perhaps not that recent, but more recent, another very important document, the traffic impact of highway capacity reductions, which I'm not going to read out the whole text here, but basically said that in a congested area, if you reduce traffic to the capacity of a road, it doesn't end up with gridlock, traffic disappears. So I'll say this again because these are fundamental. So in equitability, we cannot provide for everyone who owns a car and would like to drive. Therefore, we have to properly provide for alternative modes by giving them at least some advantage over the car use. And then traffic disappears when you restrict the road network capacity for cars in an urban area. you don't get traffic gridlock or just traffic displacement. The road network resets itself with lower traffic flows because people change their travel behaviour. Those two concepts need to sink in. And I'll emphasise it in a different way, that pre-COVID, daily trips to Oxford city centre, this was the breakdown. Over half the trips were on bus and 22,000 were on cycle with 46,000 by car. Oxford would not function without more space-efficient alternatives to the car. And actually promoting alternatives benefits everyone, including those leading the drive, because it means you don't get gridlock. And finally, to push this, I will give you an image from 1961. In 1961, 100,000 cars used to come into Oxford city centre, and this is what it looked like. It was a long line of roads. In fact, this is Cornmarket Street, but High Street was the same. Basically, it was congested. And it isn't like that now, not because we built our way out of it, it's because we applied traffic restrictions from about 1973 onwards. Anyway, let's go with the challenges of delivering LTNs. Next topic, or final topic really. We know from national data, and this is from a national survey, which was statistically sound. I mean, it would have been done by random sample, that about 66% of the population either strongly support or support reallocation of road space for walking and cycling, the kind of thing you do in a low traffic neighbourhood. And as that little bit of the side says, this might come as a surprise to people who rely on social media to gauge public opinion. So that is shown nationally. Locally, so we'll go on, so next thing is, in spite of the government's, let's say the government's guidance, quite strong guidance with LTNs, so far there are 426 LTNs in some form of preparation, of which 110 nationally have been implemented. Now that might sound quite good, but actually when you look at the next chart, 84 of those 110 have been implemented in London. And if you look at outside London, this is every single local authority which has implemented some LTNs. And that's, you've got to compare that list of about 10 local authorities against the fact there are actually around about 115 highway authorities outside London. So we've got in Birmingham, Bournemouth, Cambridge, probably for a good reason, Greater Manchester, Kent, Newcastle, Nottingham, Oxfordshire rather. There's what could be called an LTN in Harwell, Poole in York. So there are not many places doing this so far, other than London. So we realised that one of the problems, the benefits are absolutely, there's no doubt about the benefits of LTNs. But the challenge is actually implementing them. So we wanted to understand who supports LTNs and who doesn't, to get an idea what groups were saying, yes, this is really good, and what groups that weren't. And this is based on the resident responses from the Cowley area survey, 967 responses. We got a 17 response rate, which some people would say, is it representative? It's impossible to say, but we kind of roughly matched on gender, age and ethnicity with the local area by the ward area. So I would say, just in a feel, it's probably it's generally representative. It may be slightly biased towards LTNs, but I wouldn't think very much. So first of all, we found that residents in all the areas supported their local LTNs. They varied from Florence Park, where 79% supported it, Temple Cowley 71%, and Church Cowley 59%. Can't really say why that is. It may in fact probably be to the amount of work that local organisations such as OLS have done in the area. But I think what happens is the more people know about LTNs, I think the greater the support for them. If you look at dig into that data and look at residents actually who live on the rat runs, and then just take into account their results, you find that actually people living on rat runs are even more supportive of LTNs. So with Rymers Lane and Crescent Road, we got over 90% of support. Cornwallis, Little Hay Road, Churchill Road, Temple Road, it's kind of, well, there's approaching 80%, and then Temple Road, Cowley Road is more, Barcelona Road, it's not quite so high. And some of those are a significant percentage of the people, residents and living there. The ones with 3 stars represent that 30% of all the people who could respond did respond. So I think it's a fair picture of what those people in those streets actually want. So there is very strong support for these LTNs, especially on the streets which suffer most from rat running. We looked at also the same data in a different way. We cut it by the mode of people's mode. Because of COVID-19, we couldn't ask kind of how many journeys very easily. So we asked people what they thought of their normal road, what mode they would typically use. So when we say normal, that's the question: what do you normally use? What do you use typically? So cyclists, people who cycle normally, it is overwhelming support. Equally, people who walk normally, it's their normal walk is, it's over 80%. So those 2 modes, obviously, there's great support for LTNs. With people bus use, there's equally, so it's 68% support, not quite so high, but still quite a significant majority. Come to normal drivers, that's where the people who said they normally drive, that's where we start having a kind of more split. So we've got 42%, but still just a majority, but 46% oppose. So we looked into that data more. So remember that 42, 46%. So before I go on, I forgot. These are percentage of people total responded. So 34% of all the respondents said they were normal drivers, 10% said they usually passed normally, 50% said they walked normally, and 44% normally cyclists. These add up to more than 100% because you could tick more than one if you had 2 modes you thought was your normal mode. So coming back to so this is now just normal drivers, just the percentage of people who have said they were normal drivers, and we looked at to what they also ticked in terms of what other mode, particularly in terms of cycling, which was actually the most significant. So normal drivers who also cycle, which is driver and cyclist down here, they are 66% in support. So they are in support with 34% against, whereas the drivers who do not cycle at all, it was 30% in support, but 62% against. And we could actually just look at that in a bit more detail, the same detail. There's the 38, 62%. We could say, did you tick the cycle sometimes or cycle with normal cycling? And so once again, the more they cycled, the more the drivers, these are people who normally drive as well, they were more in support. And if they cycle sometimes, still well in support. Once again, the ones who didn't cycle at all, not in support at all. That's as far as we could do in terms of the data. We did actually analyze it in various ways to see, why is it that the ones who don't cycle, what is it? There was a percentage of people who were disabled, so in which case they probably had no choice. But that was only probably about 30% of these the drivers of this type. So I think it comes down to attitude, which is the next question. We look back at the question we had earlier on terms of the what do you want in your local area? The choice, the one which came at the bottom of the list, keep local roads open so it's convenient for car drivers, basically. And this is the data. So for that question, so once we've got the people who don't cycle, they're all normal drivers. The ones who don't cycle, the ones who cycle sometimes, cycle also are normal cyclists. This percentage, that their attitude was different, basically. Their attitude was, actually, this is important. Keeping local roads open is very important, which is what that the orange shows. Whereas for the cycle sometimes not so important, and for the ones who've got the choice of cycling, it becomes a much less important. So in fact, lots of them say it's not important at all. So in a way, I think in the end, the drivers who don't cycle, it is actually not to do with any demographic features. It's to do with, it comes down to an attitude of how they regard, that the car driving is important to them, and they don't see an alternative. Looking into kind of what will happen, because we also asked the respondents, the Cowley residents, during the trial, will you cycle? And once again, the same groups, the ones who are already cycling, 65% said they will cycle more. The ones who are cycling sometimes, 54% said they will cycle more. But the ones who don't cycle, it's a much smaller group. 17% said they will cycle more or start cycling, that was the other option. And 65% said they definitely wouldn't or gave no answer, and 18% said probably not. So in a way, it seems to be there's a group of who are perhaps going to be difficult to persuade, but whether the LTN will actually make a difference or have an influence or not. So that's the kind of end of that. So I'm going to finish with looking to the future. In the Tranche 2 funding, we have proposed 6 more LTNs, which have been funded. There are 3 in East St Mary's, which is here, St Clement's, which is small one there, the Divinity Road area, and there are 3 in Headington, Quarry, New Headington, and Old Headington. And those ones, the Headington ones, are particularly to improve that cycle route and improve that cycle route. But we are still at early stages of these, and so I'm not going to talk any more about them. That's the end of my part of my presentations. So thank you for everyone for being patient and listening. And I'll hand over to Scott or Andy.
Oh, thanks, Patrick. Just fantastic, and so good to hear the background of how you got the opinions of so many residents. There've been a few questions come up on the chat, which I thought might come up better now. One early thing, which I think you covered quite well, was how to balance making some roads quieter with what on first look inevitably meant that other roads would be more busy. I don't know if you want to enlarge on that at all, whether there's any anticipation that any of the roads will get busier and it's just an unavoidable side effect, or whether you hope that actually overall car use will drop enough.
It's one sense, I'll say it's impossible to know for certain, which is why this is an experiment. But my expectation is that there will be a month or so with more traffic. But actually, in terms of the main roads, that will probably sort itself out within a month as people make different decisions, and some will be timing. It's possible there'll be what's called peak spreading, where people delay coming in or go or leave earlier. But I think locally, on the more local roads or in the rest, I think it will happen very quickly. I think the traffic will basically it's already has reduced, and I think that will lead to more people cycling and walking and making other decisions. So I think maybe our main concern is about 1 or 2 roads on the residential areas where there may be some minor increase in traffic, just because whereas they were going out, let's say, by Littlemore Road, for instance, I'll give one example, Westbury Crescent, there may be just a very slight increase in traffic on Westbury Crescent. I've actually looked at all the junctions as they've gone in to see where there's going to be problems. So far, Newman Road seemed to be functioning okay, Westbury Crescent seemed to be functioning okay. That was my immediate concern. So the answer is, that's a rather long way of saying, I think it will settle down in the end and that traffic will disappear, that the main roads will continue to be busy, but no more busy than they would have been, and but at the same time, the residential area will be much less busy.
Thank you.
Can you also answer the question for people who are vulnerable in some way or use wheelchairs? So how do you deal with people who need to use a vehicle in some way?
We asked questions about disability, and I was thinking about presenting on that. The responses were split between different disabilities. So some groups were in favour. The groups that were perhaps least in favour, or were not in favour, you could say, was about 60% against, were the mobility impaired. So accept that there will be some disadvantage, especially in the short term, which it's difficult to do anything about. But I think in the end, it may be the fact that actually the local roads become easier to drive in for those people, at least to get to the main roads. I mean, it's a difficult decision, because it's a difficult decision, and we're monitoring this, because there will be some people who will have to make longer journeys to get to their places they want to. And for most people, let's say, well, that's just part of the course. We understand some disabled, it will be harder. We're doing well. I think just the overall benefit in the end will be greater, because if we don't change course, we'll end up with that congestion, which no one is going to benefit. So it is unfortunate there will be some losers in the short term, and I can only apologise that if you're one of the losers, that actually
Go on.
Can you also say something about, there's an awful lot of obviously anti-LTN rhetoric. Can you say something to counter that? And will you hold your nerve so that it beds in, or we've heard that Jericho might be going?
I'm not talking about Jericho, because that's a different situation. I mean, Jericho was never really. Jericho was a different kind of LTN. It wasn't designed. All these have been designed as LTNs from the start, in the way that, whereas Jericho was a kind of, it's different. And I wasn't involved within Jericho, so I won't say anything about Jericho. Obviously, who holds nerve? It won't be me. It'll be whether the council is. I think at the moment, we expected a lot of noise. We expected a lot of kind of a bit of turmoil for the first 2 weeks. I think it's working. I think when I've seen a scheme, sometimes I've gone out and said, "Oh dear, this hasn't quite worked as I wanted." My impression of the LTN in Cowley is actually exceeded expectations. So really, it is people getting used to the fact they're having to follow different routes. And as I can, in a way, if you look at Littlemore, do people at the end of Littlemore wake up and say, "Oh dear, I've got to drive all the way to the end of this long road before I can start making my journey"? It's just kind of like the road network has changed. And I think after a while, people will just realise that the road network has changed. They can still make the same journeys they want. It's just there's a little bit of extra journey at the beginning of it.
So is there a sort of time limit on how long you're going to look at it, give it time to bed in?
Well, it's been implemented by an experimental traffic regulation order, which requires us, it doesn't force us, but to do the ETRO, we have to give it 6 months before we make a decision. We can obviously scrap it all and say it didn't work at all, but if we're actually going through the process, we have to give it 6 months to understand the system, for us to take time to monitor what's happening, including monitoring what's happening on the main roads, monitoring air pollution, monitoring sound, noise, all those other things, but also for the local residents and also other residents to actually get used to it and say, well, actually, it's inconvenient to begin with, but actually now I've got used to it, or not, as the case may be. So I think it needs a time to people get used to it. My feeling is a bit like that image of Cornmarket. I'm sure they had the same problem when they took the cars out of Cornmarket for the first time. And who would say, let's put cars back in Corn Market? Who's even saying, let's put cars back in high streets? I think it will just become the new norm. And I think it will become the new norm with many, many benefits to everyone in terms of health, access, and air quality.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Scott has been so involved in raising the profile of low traffic neighbourhoods, and really, I think takes a lot of credit for continuing to encourage, and in particular in Florence Park. And we'd like to hear from him how it looks from a community point of view, really, and perhaps answer some of the questions that have come up in discussion here. Scott, can I hand over? Great, thanks.
Thanks, Andy. And thanks, Patrick. That was tremendous. So I'll just be a little bit pacey with these. The remit was to talk a little bit about engagement and getting these things up and running. So everything before the council takes over. So I think everyone knows what LTN is. So I'm not going to do our wonderful little OLS video here. That's on our YouTube channel if you want to check it out. It's only a minute long. Okay, just a little bit of focus on cycling. So, you know, I saw a little bit of the chat just now, people saying, well, maybe one person was saying, well, actually, you're not giving people a segregated cycle route with these LTNs, and surely people would prefer a segregated cycle route. I think it's important to remember that the Dutch have a very clear view on that issue. If you don't need to segregate cyclists from road traffic, so long as road traffic is quite light. So the Dutch only bother building segregated cycle routes where you have quite a lot of volume of traffic. And so the LTN is an alternative to a segregated cycle route. It really clears out the through traffic so that there is space and safety to cycle. And I can tell you firsthand, I literally spoke to a neighbor today who was like ecstatic because she's been cycling to work for the past few days and she's never done that before. And there's other anecdotes. Maybe I'll run through a couple of those a little bit later. But LTNs and cycling, what do we know? As I say, that we clear out quite a lot of vehicular movements from these minor roads. These are very minor roads which should be able to support cycling and walking. We're going to focus on cycling here. And what's going on is that short trips that were done by car will shift to cycle. Now, certainly not all short trips, but many. And we know from national data that about 20% of trips under 1 mile are done by car currently. And of course, for London, it's a much bigger figure, and Oxford's probably a lot more like London in that respect. And so you can think about LTN as being a bit of carrot and a bit of stick. So the carrot is by clearing out the through traffic, it is much more pleasant. It literally invites people out to use their cycle and to try it. And I mean, we're witnessing that right now. And the stick is, for some people, it's just kind of a pain to have to go around, or it's perceived, it just feels more difficult to go around, although no one's being asked to like physically lift up their car and walk it around. They still have, petrol or electric power to drive, but nevertheless, it's more inconvenient. So that's the stick. So LTNs are working on both of these principles. I did mention that anecdote of my neighbor, but that was literally just tonight. I'd already written this presentation, but on the school run, there was a friend that I know at school, and she was so proud she had her bike, and she brought her kids to bike for the very first time from Church Cowley, where she lives, down to the school near Florence Park. And she was just so happy about that. And over the weekend, there was a gentleman in front of the house, and he was with his bike, and he also lives in Church Cowley. And he said, actually, to tell you the truth, I usually do this trip by car, but there's a filter in the way, and I just thought, actually, it looks really pleasant by bike, so he took the bike. So this kind of shift is happening, and this is, people refer to this as evaporation. It really is happening. Let's see. Here are a few facts about, just again, since I'm speaking to a cycling group, LTNs are not exclusively about cycling, far from it. But since we are tonight a cycling group, just to highlight some of the facts about impacts of LTNs, there have been many LTNs implemented over the summer, as Patrick showed you some of the data of how many have been implemented. But in few cases have there been very close monitoring. And two of those cases are Railton in Lambeth and St. Peter's in Islington. And you can just see the figures here. This, by the way, this presentation will be available. I don't know. I'm happy to share it with Cyclox, so maybe they can distribute it to you afterwards. But these links, the data is all available in these links. So you get these pretty sizable increases in cycling, which is kind of reflects the kind of reality that we're seeing right here in Cowley right now. But notwithstanding that, it is a kind of stylized fact that, politically, you can't sell an LTN on the basis of cycling. You have to de-emphasize cycling in order to get these, to bring more people into the tent. And this country has a kind of strange sort of tabloid press problem with cycling. I think it's something we've really got to tackle, but it is a fact for now. And so, when myself and other people set up Oxfordshire Liveable Streets just 3 years ago, we were advised very strongly by people like Simon Hunt, and I think he might be in the audience tonight. Thank you, Simon, to de-emphasize cycling, and that really we need a campaign organization as well as Cyclox. We need one that is a bit broader and isn't just about cycling. So that's part of the genesis of OLS. And also it happened in Waltham Forest. That was the strong advice coming out of Waltham Forest, and I think that's where Simon Hunt got it, as well as what began as a mini Holland program, really kind of celebrating cycling, evolved into this Enjoy Waltham Forest, which is what it is currently called. So just to say, tranche one, this complements Patrick's presentation a little bit. I just wanted to give you the context for these 3 LTNs. Some of you will have seen this online probably, or on Twitter or something, but those purple squares are the 3 LTNs in Cowley that are going in as we speak. And the pink areas are existing low traffic neighborhoods in the sense that they don't accommodate through traffic. So one way to look at these new LTNs is these have been an accident. These are an accident of Google Maps, an accident of Waze, an accident of the fact that people have been sent down these shortcuts to avoid the main road infrastructure. And this has been overlooked for decades. And all the LTNs, these LTNs, the local authority is doing is just fixing this decades-old accident. By the way, the yellow ones here are aligned with what Patrick already showed you, which is possible tranche 2 LTNs. This is just a close-up of what one of the OLS members put together. Is this wonderful map showing you points of entry and exit from all the little catchments that are created by these filters in these 3 areas. But also on the left here, I don't know if I have a, yes, I have a spotlight. Over here, oops, is actually existing LTN catchment area for Rose Hill and for Iffley and for Iffley borders. So it's kind of not very different to what's already out there. It just doesn't feel that way. Another good example is Phipps Road. We all know there's a barrier here on Phipps Road that was put in to stop this shortcut. So it's kind of, it's something that's natural. It's been overlooked, and now we're just fixing that. If you want more details about the sort of residents group supporting this, go to liveablecowley.org.uk. Also, Oxfordshire Liveable Streets, for whom I am a director, also has a website where we have some information, but there we call it something slightly different, Liveable Neighbourhoods. So that's what to look for if you go to the OLS website. Tranche 2, only just to say, I've listed some of the local groups that are working on this in their areas. So, if you're watching tonight, you're interested in bringing this to where you live, I would say, as a resident, get in touch with one of these groups for sure, and just kind of dig in, muck in to get going. And let's talk about that just a little bit. How do you get an LTN? I mean, the truth is, I really don't know, but I can hazard a few guesses. So I think what I would advise is the first thing is just prepare the ground. And that means, you know, really what we have been focusing in here in East Oxford is the Florence Park area, because it was such a clearly defined area, and it has this junction of two very big cut-throughs at Cornwallis and Reimers. And on that basis, we really worked quite intensely here in the local community to get people to know more about what an LTN is. So, you know, the spirit of that effort, which started in 2019, was really about information sharing. And so we brought people from Waltham Forest up here to speak in the community center to big groups about their experience and to share information about what happened. But we also organized safari trips down to Waltham Forest. Now, you know, that's part of building this local information. And as Patrick alluded to, you're lucky because you don't need to do that anymore. Come to Cowley and see this. Also, you know, organize some presentations and invite people from Waltham Forest or perhaps Railton or Islington to talk about their LTNs as well. I think fundamental, though, is building councillor support. And this probably feels like the most daunting part if you're a campaigner or a resident who wants these things. Sometimes this is the most overlooked element because it's hard, right? But without councillor support, the local authorities just they're not going to work on an LTN. Like, it's very unlikely. So the key thing for you to do is to work with your local councillors, build that support. And I've written here a few things you might want to do, which is what we did here. You know, we hosted a meeting for councillors and officers to meet with their counterparts from Waltham Forest in a safe space to really get the ball rolling. And you could do the same thing where you live. And again, organize safari trips for your elected members. And you can bring them to Cowley. That's the good news. Just a few things about so-called bikelash. I probably don't need to tell this group what this means, but yes, of course, there will be pushback. I would say, you know, the best advice here is, you know, to be as understanding as possible. And I came up with this analogy about, you know, to try and understand where, you know, people are coming from. For a lot of the people, you know, we don't really have big pushback in the Florence Park area, but doing these LTNs in Church Cowley as well as Florence Park, you know, is harder because there just wasn't that outreach effort over the past couple of years in Church Cowley. So it would be quite a shock. And to be frank, the local authority probably could have done more, but they were very under-resourced. And, you know, officers did their absolute best, but they just need more resources to do outreach to the local community, where OLS hadn't been working as intensely. So that's an issue. But I came up with this analogy to try and put yourself in the shoe of someone. Imagine you wake up and you've been told that your children are no longer going to be going to primary in their normal school, but it's being switched with a primary somewhere else. Everything will be the same teachers, same friends, etc. But they just won't be using that building anymore, and now they'll be switched, just arbitrarily switched overnight. And you can imagine how frustrating that would be, and you know, and dare I say that would be anger-inducing. So it's the key thing is to listen and work from there, basically. But as I say, you know, high traffic neighborhoods that we're fixing are the accident that are getting fixed. That for me, the major concern that we really have to give time to is this issue about displacement of traffic. So what do we know about that? And by the way, we should all use the words major and minor roads, not residential roads, because major roads are residential roads. You know, by and large, the vast majority of major roads are residential roads. It's really important to use those terms. But what do we know from these recent LTNs is actually on the perimeters, we get rough stability or a decrease in traffic on the perimeter roads. Although in Walthamstow Village, as I've marked out here, you have an increase. I will say that 11% increase is set against about a 6% increase in outer London boroughs generally over that same time period. So, if, you know, of that 11%, you know, at least half of that is coming from background increase in traffic. But the rest, I suppose, is displacement, and that's too much. So what are we going to do about the major roads? I mean, it seems to me we have two choices. One is we revert to these high traffic neighborhoods. And you have to think, well, what have we gained here? So, and is that really a solution? So do you really mean that before we had LTNs and before the pandemic, we had smoothly flowing main routes? That's absolutely not the case. The other option is that we deal with area-wide demand for vehicular travel in our city. And I just want to end on that note, because I think this is really, really fundamental. That brings us to the big picture for Oxford. And there's several elements and pieces to the jigsaw here for the big picture. I've written some of them down, but I just want to focus on connecting Oxford, which we'll all be hearing more about is in the coming months, I'm quite sure. Connecting Oxford includes 5 bus gates and a new bus route and a workplace parking levy to help pay for some of this stuff, and also to act as a disincentive to driving. I am going to show you this video about connecting Oxford because I don't think it goes far enough, and this is my chance to try and proselytize. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. That is also on our YouTube channel. So the thing about connecting Oxford is it is bold, but I want you to understand it's a plan for commuters. And that's no bad thing, but we just have to be clear. It's a plan for commuters, not really a plan for Oxford itself, particularly insofar as it leaves this gaping hole, as you just saw in that video at St. Clement's. And if we can just plug those, then we have a Ghent style plan, which I won't go into tonight. But the point is, by doing that, we can make all traffic local in the same way that we're doing that with LTNs. We can do that for Oxford as a city, so that if you live on a main road in Oxford, we can make that your traffic local traffic and not through traffic. It's a similar principle to the LTN itself. So thank you very much. I'd be happy to take questions as well if there are any.
Thank you, Scott. I've had a little bit of internet fun and games, and I'm not quite sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. It's difficult to know what part of this process one should concentrate at this point. I suppose one thing is this business about how long before people will feel as if this is, as Patrick puts it so nicely, the new normal. How do you anticipate, from conversations you've had with Waltham Forest and so on, before almost people forget what it was like before?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Andy. It's interesting. There are a couple of Facebook groups which are called Liveable Cowley and Liveable Oxford, which anyone's welcome to join. And in those groups also are some people from Waltham Forest who've been very involved in not only Waltham Forest's mini Holland program, but also many of the London LTNs brought out last summer. And one of those people advised us that actually within by the 3-month mark, people should start feeling like this is pretty normal. So in other words, traffic will have settled in, the schemes themselves will have bedded in, people will, you know, you will have seen some modal shifts. So big effects even at the 3-month mark. Certainly we need to wait that long before rendering any kind of a verdict, and I would prefer 6 months.
Thank you. Catherine, can I just ask you if you've picked up any other questions that...
It's been more conversation really about road surfaces and cycle paths and so on, and whether we need a cycle path if you've got a low traffic neighbourhood.
So I might go back to a question that Kirsty Hull brought up earlier, and that is that you may reduce the volume of traffic, but doesn't that just encourage it to go more quickly through these streets? And that can be just as off-putting. And I wondered if, well, perhaps Scott, whether you've got a view on how one manages that. Yeah,
I mean, the standard answer to that, I think, is a very valid one, which is that local traffic is much better behaved traffic. So there are studies which show that the vast majority of speeding traffic is out of area traffic, partly because it's trying to get somewhere very fast, partly because it doesn't live in the area. It doesn't feel the same connection to the area. So if you've reduced that to just local people, you are likely to see lower speeds. The other thing I want to say is that in the chat here just a minute ago, I saw someone raise the question, when will these things be implemented? And I think it's really important to say that we don't have a full low traffic neighborhood yet in any of these areas, insofar as there are still some bollards that need to go in, and the ANPR cameras are necessary to enforce 2 of the filter locations, one in Church Cowley, one in Florence Park. And until those go in, traffic will continue to stream through those filter points. So you won't really observe that safe cycle route, that safe route for children to reach their primary school, where you've got a gaping hole in one of the filters. So, again, that's a reason for us to have to wait before we draw any judgments. And the sooner we get the ANPR cameras, the better, obviously, but I think it's a number of weeks.
Thank you. And the other point brought up, both in media and online just now, is about emergency vehicle access. And I think there's been quite a lot of misinformation about this, and I understand South Central Ambulance Service was involved in the discussions. But how does that come over in people's discussion about LTNs?
Patrick, I don't know if you want to handle that. I'm going to look at one of our resources.
Have I? Oh, I've got an echo, have I? I think I've got an echo. If I can talk now, I can talk. We're talking to the ambulances. I calculated if the ambulances take the right direction, right path, you can get to either side of all these filters virtually in the same time. So it's a question of the ambulance sat nav ensuring that they go the right way. We're in discussion now. Let's say there were a few teething problems again, I'll put it that way, in order to get this conversation going. But so I don't think it is, in a sense, it's not an issue once it's been resolved. No, it's not the low traffic neighbourhood which is the issue. It's the actual ensuring that the ambulance are aware of it and that their sat navs pick up the right direction.
There's also a question on whether you're counting traffic and whether there are any air pollution stats. Is this being monitored at all?
So I didn't quite catch that.
Whether air pollution stats and traffic is being monitored.
Yes, we are. We've set up air pollution. We've set up noise pollution stats. We have a problem in one sense that we've got a strange baseline. We don't have a baseline of traffic. Normally, if we were doing this, we'd go out, measure traffic, come back, see what happens and measure back. But being in a lockdown, all the kind of traffic data is quite meaningless almost. So we can compare back to what happened pre-COVID-19, but it does, it does create a funny situation in terms of normal traffic monitoring. But we are monitoring. We've set up a monitoring regime to see what will happen in terms of various elements, and also there are 2 surveys on the council website, which is worth pointing out. Because actually, I didn't actually realize there were 2 surveys. There's one survey which is under C, Cowley LTN, which is about the kind of getting people's opinion of it, where you have to register. Then there's another one, the E, experimental traffic regulation, or MESP, which is to get a snapshot just at the beginning in terms of it asks people how many cycle journeys they make and how many car journeys and things like that. So if you go onto the council website, note you can fill in 2 conservations on the Cowley LTN, and please fill both of them in. Actually, it's all very useful for us.
Thank you. And Emma Bryn asked about whether, if people are finding it more difficult to take their children to school, are there any initiatives to help with that? And I would just like to say that there's been a well-established bike bus in Headington going to Windmill School, and I think there are also various walking buses. So I would hope that these sort of things would quickly develop, though, as I think she said, there will always be some people who need to drive their children to school. But I don't know, Patrick, whether the school streets initiative is another thing that's going to interfere, as it were, with people's ability to drop children off, and whether that's sort of going to complement some of these initiatives.
Well, the council is introducing a number of school streets, particularly for the LTNs, one in St Christopher's. And in a school street, what happens is during school, the start of the school, the end of the school, parents with children cannot drive into the street, and there'll be some people at each end telling parents they can't. So the idea is that they park in and they walk their child up to the school and then walk back down, and that way you take away traffic from the schools in front of the school. So that's one initiative which we would like to expand to, well, we're intending to expand to other schools as well. But there's also an activation project where the council has funding and is working to basically encourage people to cycle and walk. I haven't actually been very involved in this because I'm just too busy with the actual infrastructure side. But I know, for instance, they're involving the local community doing maps. In fact, probably Scott could probably talk about this more than me, but we are taking measures to encourage people to get on their bicycle to start walking as part of the LTN. I don't know if Scott knows more than me, or we would like to come chip in at that point.
Yeah, just to say on the school streets in particular, they're not designed to make a person's life harder who's trying to get a disabled child to school, or someone who's got a cast, or anything. That's really not the point. The vast majority of parents driving appreciate and understand that school streets are designed to just keep cars away from the entrances to schools, and it's not a kind of punitive or very draconian regime. It does use retractable barriers, but it's staffed by volunteers. It's here in Oxford. In London, these are controlled by ANPR cameras. That's not the case in Oxford.
Thank you. And just a rather more specific question about motorbikes, and when you have a filter that and we see this all the time on Turl Street at the moment. I must say it's just a scooter highway as far as I can see, but whether if there isn't an ANPR, are we just going to sort of turn a blind eye to motorbikes and scooters? Any views on those?
Well, first of all, the traffic regulation orders means that it is illegal for scooters or motorbikes to go through these filters. E-bikes is fine. e-scooters will be fine once they but motorbikes and mopeds are not permitted, so they are breaking the law. That's the first thing. Where it's a bus filter, where the two bus filters, where we've got ANPR cameras, the council can enforce and will have the cameras and be able to enforce it. If it's not a bus route, the council has no powers of enforcement, and it relies on the police. So in a way, it then becomes a police priority. I do expect, if these LTNs bed in, that the motorbikes or mopeds going to them will become more visible and more, as they'll be the only motorized traffic, and motorbikes and mopeds, as I've done some sign surveys, do tend to be noisier than cars, will become a source of complaint, I feel. But at the present moment, we cannot do anything about it. It's entirely up to the police. And I don't think at the moment it's a police priority. But we may find that possibly at a certain situation, the police can do some kind of spot fines and that. So it is enforceable, but not by the council.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that has been absolutely fantastic, I must say, and the detail preparation from both of you really has been most appreciated. I just checking with my fellow organisers whether there are any other questions people would like to ask, or whether we can draw it to a close at this point. Catherine, have you spotted any other?
It's just I can't find it. A question of one of the filters being removed at Warnford Lane, a bus filter being removed at Warnford Lane.
Oh, so right, yes. I think this is no public. When we put the bid in, we included some bus gates on the main roads, Warnford Lane and in fact at Cowley Road. At the point of putting that bid in, it was at the point when the government was basically giving us instructions, those management instructions, to do things very quickly, to not worry about consultation, just get on with it. So we did put some quite radical, quite transformative measures in. Subsequently, the government has realised, actually, with the COVID crisis kind of, let's say, morphing into something slightly different, that we didn't need, that they wanted to make sure that the public was going with it. So they emphasised consultation. So those schemes have been put into the Connecting Oxford proposals. Well, some of them already in there, to be drawn up with more, let's say, with more consultation, more data, and so they're not within this kind of these schemes which we're trying to do, which need to be delivered this year. There was also a funding issue as well, because although we were very successful in the bid, there was funding which our schemes are still more expensive than the money we received, because we were always, perhaps like quite often, a little bit over optimistic and to what we could deliver within the money. So those schemes have been deferred into the Connecting Oxford schemes.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, a bit like the LTNs, this talk has exceeded my expectations. There's been far more background and detail to understand the thinking and the rationale behind it and the benefits. So thank you to both our speakers for an excellent presentation. And I think for those of us who are in favour, the more opportunities we have to make that viewpoint heard widely, while recognising there are going to be teething problems, and there may, as Patrick honestly said, be some people for whom it does continue to make life more difficult. But hopefully this will become the new norm very quickly. And thank you to all the attendees. And good night to all.
Right.
Thank you. I do urge everyone to go and visit Cowley.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's really worth to open your eyes to what it's like. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Patrick. Bye, and thanks,
Thank
Scott.
you. Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.